was standing next to one of the two delegates, official delegates from Pakistan, which is one of the state's parties to the convention. And the other delegate was up on the stage speaking about how terrible it all was. We were having floods, we were having droughts, and we were having this, and we were having that. It was all ghastly, and it was all because of our fault. And quietly the other delegate said, he knows, and I know, that there's not a word of truth in any of that, and that the whole of this thing is just nonsense, but we've been told by our government to say it, and so that's what we have to say.
Lord Mongton, we've got to go to break, and that's just as well, because you just covered some key info. Your phone for the first time was breaking up. Let's perhaps reestablish the line or see if it clears up during the break. I want you to come back, because that takes us to the WikiLeaks cable, which the State Department admits is real, which you covered without having the secret documents, that the U.S. and England were in there twisting arms last year and promising people payoffs if they went along. Lord Kristoffer Mongton joins us. His website and organization is the leading think tank, really laying out the facts of this global takeover, and we are beginning to win battles and the war. Scienceandpublicpolicy.org. Our sites are Infowars.com, PrisonPlanet.com, and PrisonPlanet.tv. We are fighting the prison planet, the collectivist and their elitist owners. See, the ultra-rich, many of them are in a camp not liking free market. They want to use government to shut everybody else down because they can't compete. And Lord Mongton is fighting them and routing them to the ends of the earth, and they run from him in literal fear. I've seen video activists have shot. It is as if the mild-mannered Lord is Darth Vader or something, or a giant bucket of holy water to a vampire. Now, I have the London Guardian report here, Lord Mongton, where they admit, and the State Department admits this in its anger, they admit it's a real cable, that other governments were all freaked out by the threats, the bribes, the promises of money, the arm twisting. We see the United States at the center, along with Gordon Brown, the disgraced former prime minister, spearheading this, trying to ram it through on people, and you knew that at the time, but now that's all come out, and that was mirroring what you were talking about, the Pakistani minister who's been promised money, up there spewing all this, it's the end of the world, oh my gosh, the West did it, because they've been promised money. This is now confirmed. It just shows what incredible fraud this is.
The whole thing is nonsense, but let's be nice to the bedwetters. Let's make this Be Nice to Bedwetters week, and let us pretend, just for the sake of argument, Alex, that in fact there is every bit as much of a global warming problem as the United Nations would like to imagine. It is, of course, imaginary, but it is, let's just pretend, just for the sake of a game. All right. Now, we know that at this conference, they are going to try to bully the countries of the West, who are all too eager, most of them, to comply, to hand over $100 billion of Western taxpayers' money to the UN. Of course, the name of the game is that it's supposed to go to third world countries to help them to adapt to the consequences of the terrible global warming that we in the West have caused by our emissions of carbon dioxide. But let's just pretend for a moment that they're right. $100 billion a year is $1 trillion every 10 years. Now, the thing is this, that in order to forestall just 1 Celsius degree of warming, if the U.S. government was right in its figures for how much the Waxman-Markey bill would cost, which had a fairly typical lot of range of measures like cap and trade and regulations on emissions and all that kind of thing, then you would need to spend $100 billion a year for 340 years in order to forestall just 1 Celsius degree of warming.
That Al Gore says is going to make all the coastal cities disappear within 7 years. So a 300-year solution to a 7-year problem.
That's right, and not only that, but if you wanted to forestall all 300 3.4 degrees Celsius, which is about 6 Fahrenheit, of warming, which the UN says might happen on the globe by 2100, in the next 100 years, then it would take you 1,000 years of spending $100 billion rate just to make that tiny amount of temperature change not happen. So there's a huge mismatch between what these people are trying to argue for here and what they could possibly achieve. And curiously, until I recently did these calculations, nobody anywhere in the world had sat down and worked out and said, okay, supposing we spend all this money, how much global warming will we actually forestall? It's all been done on the basis that if we spend the money, maybe it will make a contribution. Nobody has worked out that, in fact, it makes practically no difference at all. So even if there were a problem as big as these nitwits here think that there is, the fact is that all the spending that they're proposing to make, and it's critically expensive spending, would not make anything like enough difference even to begin to chip away at the problem. And this leads to the obvious conclusion that if there were to be any problems arising from warmer weather, and frankly, if you find any global warming, send us some in Scotland. My lovely wife could do it very badly. Then if there really were, what we would simply do is to say, look, we'd be better off adapting to the warmer weather and its consequences in a focused way as and only where and only when necessary, rather than squandering all these billions and trillions now on what is an entirely futile exercise.
Lord Mongton, you got cut off by the break earlier. You were trying to tell the story of the Pakistani minister telling you that the other Pakistani minister was just saying it because they've been promised money. That's now confirmed by the cables that this secret arm twisting was going on. Recap that, because your phone was breaking up at that time.
Yes, certainly. This, in fact, I think I mistakenly said this was in Copenhagen last year. In fact, it was Bonn this year, at which one of my colleagues, Wolfgang Müller, who is from the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, which I also belong to, it's an environmental group that believes in looking after the environment rather than worrying about global warming, and we're here under their aegis. He was sitting next to one of the two Pakistani delegates at the discussions in Bonn, which were leading up to this conference here in Cancun. And the other delegate was up on the platform speaking and saying, oh, it's all terrible, we're doomed unless we shut down the economy of the West, all this kind of rubbish. And his colleague was sitting talking to Wolfgang Müller, not really realizing that we were on the other side of the case, and saying to me, no, actually, neither of us believe a word of this nonsense, but our government has told us to say it. And of course, we've seen this time and time again before, governments being inveigled into changing their view and becoming alarmist. India has just decided it's going to change its view and start accepting compulsory caps on the amount of carbon dioxide it emits. And it's doing this, but almost certainly because somebody has offered it a very large sum of bribe to do that. We had it in Russia when the Russian Academy of Sciences got a report from Dr. Andrei Ilarionov, who was one of its key scientists in 2004, saying, look, we've had a conference at which we invited skeptics and we invited the British government to send its chief scientist to tell us why there was a problem. We had the skeptics as well. And the chief scientist, on realizing the skeptics were there, walked out. He couldn't answer our questions. So Ilarionov then made an impassioned speech saying that Sir David King, who was then the chief scientist, had let down the name of Britain, let down the name of Sir, and had certainly convinced him that there was no problem at all with global warming. Of course, King was trying to say the exact opposite. So then 6 months later, Tony Blair went to see Gaz Putin, the new Tsar of all the Russians at that time, and said to him, look, if you want to get entry into the World Trade Organization on highly favorable terms, we want you to shut Dr. Ilarionov and the Russian Academy of Sciences up, get them to change their view, and become a true believer in the new religion of global warming. Because that way, all of us in the governing class can, and I'm going to use a rude word here, can screw the ordinary people of the world. And, of course, duly, Putin changed his mind, ordered the Russian Academy to do the same. And these are the very nasty little games that are being played. But, of course, the more they play these games, the more they get caught out. Because, the great thing about bureaucracies is that most of the people who are in these bureaucracies are actually good people. they're trying to do a decent job. They can see that the maniacs who are in charge of the asylum are dishonest and corrupt.
And so they then leak info.
One of them has the courage to stand up and say so, and that's how we get the WikiLeaks, that's how we get the ClimateGate emails, that's how we get the story from the Pakistan minister, that's how I got Andrei Ilarionov to tell me personally what I've just told you.
Unbelievable. So you were told directly by the head of the Russian Academy of Sciences that this went on. That is a huge news story in and of itself, showing how they do this by hook and by crook. Now, shifting gears, we know these people love to play the part of savior of the earth. They're also control freaks. The White House science czar agrees with Ted Turner in writings that he wants to sterilize us with chemicals in the water, and he wants one-child policies. He's also told the Associated Press in the first press conference he gave almost 2 years ago that he wants to geoengineer the planet to save us from environmental degradation. And we know Bill Gates, who's pushing this, has bought the patents for it. So another way they want to tax us is for the world having to pay them to, quote, save us from the global warming. Then they get to play the part of, like, Superman, savior of the world from Lex Luthor, the boogeyman, Bizarro, and the rest of Superman's enemies. We have an Activist Post article. UN climate concern morphs into chemtrail glee club. And I've got all the different articles here where they're hopping around at the meeting trying to get rid of the UN treaty on geoengineering from decades ago. So what else? We covered the other official documents where they call for force relocating populations. I mean, what types of bizarre craziness are you hearing from these people?
Well, of course, they are talking of forced relocations because of the imagined sea level rise, which also, incidentally, isn't happening. Sea level is rising at around 8 inches to 1 foot per century, as it has done, as best we can work it out, for the last century and a half. Before that, the records aren't too good. But we can tell from ice cores and geological records that over the last 11,400 years, sea level has risen by more than 400 feet. That's close to 4 feet per century. Now we're down to less than 1 foot per century. I'm not very terrified, are you? So yes, they then propose all these monstrous geoengineering programs, putting giant umbrellas made of aluminum up between us and the sun in outer space, and every time a meteorite comes along it punches a hole and tears the thing apart. They're thinking of using, in fact, putting more pollution back into the atmosphere because the pollution stops the sun getting through and cools down the planet. Just one problem with that, they had overestimated the amount of cooling caused by that kind of pollution, and the figures were corrected last year in a paper by Gunnar Myhre, which is about to yet again change all the science, because it means that the warming effect of CO2, paradoxically, is a lot less than the UN had formerly thought. So we're getting all these people advocating more and more extreme, absurd, and above all expensive solutions. And also, of course, very immoral solutions. You know, the idea of saying to people, you can only have one child because we say so, is outrageous. What they should be doing, but of course they won't do because they don't want to share their riches, is to make the poor people of the world richer, because as populations become more prosperous and they come up above the poverty line, then their rate of breeding slows down all by itself. You don't have to have abortion, you don't have to have artificial contraception, you don't have to have Chinese soldiers with guns shooting one of the two twins if a mother is unlucky enough to have twins. None of that needs to happen. All you have to do is make people more prosperous. That's the kind of geoengineering that the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow is in favour of, and so is the Science and Public Policy Institute. We visited just yesterday a village only 10 miles from where I'm standing in the conference hall, and that village had no electricity, no sanitation, no water, no school until a Catholic charity came and gave it one, and no health care. They have absolutely nothing except each other. And the Mexican government is spending all this money on airy-fairy conferences while its own people are starving because they don't have basic amenities like electricity. That's the kind of geoengineering I want to see. Electricity for everyone. Clean water and safe sewage disposal for everyone.
Well, Lord Mongton,
for everyone. Healthcare for everyone. That's the kind of geoengineering I want to see, but you won't hear much of that among the lunatics at this conference here in Cancun. And I hope you're getting the flavour, Alex, that I'm becoming very angry at this unwillingness of the world's governing class to listen to the needs of ordinary people around the world. It's bad enough that they spit in the face of democracy and try and take it away. It's bad enough that our freedom and our money are being taken away.